Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Climate Week 2025. We have a fascinating session today with 5 outstanding experts from the area of communication who are going to reflect on the title of our conversation today, Navigating Business Chaos Sustainability, How Companies Adapt Strategies in a Polarized Environment. We meet at a time when communications is no longer a support function. It is a lifeline. We're dealing with areas of trust, accountability, and urgency. The way we communicate determines whether innovation becomes adoption, whether commitments become action, and whether hope becomes reality. As communicators, we are not bystanders to the climate conversation. We are translators, advocates, and if we do our work right, catalysts for change. Our role is to help industry, not-for-profits, policymakers, turn innovation into adaptation, adoption, and commitments into lived progress. So let's move forward today into the conversation. I want to introduce our experts. They're from around the world. They deal with various aspects of climate and environment and sustainability and responsible business communications. And it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. First, we have Brianne Chai-Onn. Brianne is a senior expert. She deals with all aspects of sustained impact. She really is an expert, particularly on this week, where the UN Assembly is meeting, the General Assembly is meeting. She's attended many times. She's a frequent visitor to the COP meetings around the world. She's attended most recently Climate Week London. Obviously, she'll be in town for Climate Week New York City. She's been following this long before it became a front page piece of news. She sits in boardrooms. She sits in policy rooms. She'll be offering perspective. We have with us also Nicole Grubner. Nicole is a world expert in dealing with companies at the earlier stages of climate innovation and technology. Companies that are really at that funding stage, they've just come out, they're developing state-of-the-art technologies, they're working with major partners, often Fortune 500 companies who are champions of their innovation. She'll be able to address how communication really helps those companies navigate this polarized environment. We have with us also Aila Hernandez. Aila is a world-class expert dealing with various industries. Aila Hernandez develops and oversees sustainability communication strategies for clients in the consumer goods, apparel, and technology sectors, helping them strengthen their corporate reputation by effectively sharing their environmental and social initiatives. She specializes in communicating sustainable supply chains, circularity, and corporate impact reporting. So she'll be adding her thoughts. We have with us Millie Hillman. Millie is really a person where, in many cases for companies, the rubber meets the road. Companies wish to engage, they wish to communicate at this time. Millie is really the translator between the company's aspirations and the company's ability to speak directly to the market, to their shareholders, to their employees, to their customers, and to their employees. And also we have with us Jillian Semaan. Jillian is a world-class expert as part of the policy conversation. Jillian was part of the Obama administration. She's worked inside the government scene. She advises clients on how to best understand how policy and communications converge. So welcome to our expert panelists. Let me kick off with a question. Now, Brianne, you've attended these sessions before. You know that tens of thousands of people converge on a city. They converge to speak with each other. They converge to network. They converge to learn from each other. I'm going to step back for a second because our conversation is taking place days before Climate Week kicks off on the 22nd. You've recently attended Climate Week London. I'd like you to reflect on that. What was the takeaway you had from that week? I also know that Climate Week London really became Climate Week in London, but was a global meeting. I'm going to assume that Climate Week New York is going to be the same. Climate Week in New York, not about Climate Week New York. can you give us your reflections? And actually, I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind, Nicole, you've also attended some of these sessions. Listen into Brianne's answer. I would very much appreciate your thoughts as well.
Thank you, Gil. It's really great to be here today. And, it's an interesting time. And this was my first time actually attending London Climate Week. And definitely it has grown. It was always seen as like the little sister to New York Climate Week. Climate Week really is that opportunity leading into COP for major stakeholders, decision makers to come together under and coinciding with the UN General Assembly. So there are a number of large annual gatherings that are also taking place at this time. And so for London Climate Week, I think that we saw just this infusion of energy. It was much bigger. It's been, I think they were saying it was triple the size that it's been in the past, just because of that interest. And I think partly because of what is happening on this side of the pond, if you so to speak, as certain policymakers and so forth are rolling back on certain climate commitments, we are seeing others step up. And so the EU and Europe, London, or the UK definitely have been seeing that push forward in regulation and so forth. And so there was just that kind of energy kind of trying to fill a gap, so to speak. But that's not to say that this climate week is going to be any less. I mean, it is just as crowded. We have been, scouring all of these different events. And what you will see is that, where we might see policy taking a step back or government and administration, we're seeing private sector and even local, state level, city level step up. So there is a good amount of momentum that's leading into this climate week.
I'll have to get back to you in a few moments, find out what restaurants all the people hang out with when you have that many people. Now, Nicole, I wanted to turn to you for a second. You have obviously been at COP. You've represented companies really at the start of their foundation. A number of your clients are coming in for Climate Week New York from Europe, from around the world. And I wanted to get your sense. There's a lot going on, countless programs. Companies that are at the earlier stage of their development, I would almost look at these companies as some of them as unicorn tech type companies that are changing problems like, well, algae that is, sort of like polluting our water system, or taking a look at the biodegradable plastic wraps that wrap pallets that are being shipped. I mean, you're handling all of that. You're looking at how refuge becomes recycled furniture. I mean, all of that. So when you look at your clients who are coming to Climate Week and you've helped them plan for that, what are the things that you think that they should be thinking about? Brianne has laid out the fact that Climate Week New York is really, to some extent, the prep for COP. It sort of sets the tone and the agenda. What's your sort of like way of working with clients? How do you counsel them as they prepare for next week?
Well, when you're at the earlier stage, these events, as Brianne mentioned, like these cities are full of people, and they're not just locals, right? People are coming in from around the world to be part of these conversations. And at that earlier stage, it's not necessarily the time that you want to launch your innovation. It's a time that you want to be listening intently, because at that early stage, most of the time you're head down in R&D, and trying to perfect your solution. You want to get proof of concept. You want to find pilot partners. And these events are sort of these moments in the year, whether it's London Climate Week New York City, COP, to raise your head up from the lab and have a listen on what's going on in conversation, and make sure that your innovation is tracking to bring your intended value to stakeholders in the market, whether those are corporates, governments, or otherwise.
I think that's a very important point. Nicole, I think that often when we look at this, we forget that one of the valuable aspects of these meetings is networking, listening, and learning. I want to shift over to your colleague Aila for a second because, like you, her experience is very diverse. I mean, Aila, you're looking at policy, you're looking at sustainability issues, you're looking at communication. Right now, as you're looking toward the UN General Assembly and Climate Week, I would very much appreciate your reflection on, why Climate Week is held consistently during the UN General Assembly, and without going into specifics in terms of names of companies, what are some of the activities that you and your colleagues are engaged in right now? Because it's obviously this is the time where they need to be ready in terms of their communications, in terms of what they're going to say, if they're going to have conversation or commentary. What's on your plate right now?
Well, I think very similar to what Nicole was saying, I think that goes beyond startups and also applies to larger companies where Climate Week has evolved over the last few years. We historically had seen it as an opportunity for companies to take a main stage moment and really highlight some level of innovation that they were trying to launch. But that's not really the case anymore. Now it's seeming to be a much more collaborative environment. You're seeing some of the biggest organizations like CGI change the way that they're holding the conference as a whole. And instead of having main stage moments, they've really recentered it around roundtable opportunities to really strengthen conversations. There's a lot more workshops than there were before. And it's all about creating this collaborative space where no individual company is trying to stand out. I think the time that we are currently in has really strengthened the opportunity for collaboration and to bring people together to understand how can we help each other if we are all working towards a mutual goal, and what can we learn from other companies that can help strengthen our products in the long run.
Aila, if I can jump in on that for a minute, it's so important what you're saying, because in a sense it levels the playing field, right? To bring different stakeholders around the table who wouldn't necessarily meet otherwise. And especially when you're coming from abroad, you're investing, you're spending thousands of dollars to be at this event, and you're actually going to have valuable conversations sitting around the table with people that you wouldn't, ordinarily have access to.
Yeah, and I think organizers were taking the cue from what they've heard over the last few years. We've been working on Climate Week now for quite some time, and a lot of the feedback we would get from clients at the end of Climate Week was, yeah, that big conference speaking moment was nice, but I really enjoyed this particular networking reception. I really enjoyed this this dinner that I took part in where I got to meet this one other person from a different company that I would never interact with. So it's those opportunities for genuine relationship building to kind of create your own cohorts and your other advocates outside of your organization and your own individual echo chamber that really creates the value of Climate Week.
Yeah. Millie, I want to swing to you for a second and ask you a sort of a pointed question. There's a lot of chaos and swirl about the language of climate and environment right now. And yet, despite all of that, business goes on. Companies that want to have a sustainable business are moving forward responsibly. You're one of the experts who's dealing with translating company plans into media moments. You're speaking to reporters. I want to step back away from Climate Week for just a moment because you've been there in the transition in terms of policies of administrations. And we're looking at different language. We're looking at different perspectives. I know some people initially said, gee, is the world's attention to climate and environment now going to sort of be put like in storage? I sense that's not the case. But in your conversations with media specifically, what insights can you share with our listeners?
Yeah, thank you, Gil. I think that's a fantastic question. And I think it ladders really nicely into our conversation about Climate Week. Per Aila's comment, the shape of Climate Week has changed over the last year, and we would be remiss to ignore some of the greater chaos that has accelerated that change. Some of the changes are positive. You know, we are seeing more scrutiny from consumers. We are seeing more scrutiny from journalists to see actual demonstrated progress. Something you said in the beginning, Gil, was we want to be able to showcase not just commitments, but lived progress. I think that's become so key, not just for Climate Week organizers and Climate Week attendees, but also for journalists and for their readers. In a time of, post so much greenwashing and a time of greenhushing, companies are understandably being very careful about the progress they put out into the world. And you know, while there are some limitations to this, while this may feel like stagnation to some and can be scrutinized, by people in the communications field and people who are demanding urgent sustainability progress, I think we can also appreciate that companies are less likely to surge ahead of their actual abilities. Companies are being very mindful and intentional about the progress they can actually show, and they're leaning into case studies and data and human-centered stories to try and back up their claims with action. And overall, that's incredibly positive, and it's what we've noticed breaking through most with journalists are companies that have real exciting stories to tell about the impact they've made, not just corporate posturing.
I just want to stay with you for a second, Millie, on this. I sense from your comments that the most valuable resource we have is not data or technology, it's credibility. And credibility is earned through consistent, courageous, and compelling communication. And you're living that. Would you mind, without mentioning any specific company, but giving an example of a conversation you might have had with a noted reporter around these issues of greenwashing, credibility, where the rubber meets the road of something substantial?
Yeah, absolutely, Gil. I think that we're seeing from both consumers and journalists this demand for authenticity. Consumers and journalists are no longer demanding perfection from these corporate players. They no longer want to see these beautifully orchestrated press releases or these buttoned up, sustainability claims. They want to see actual lived progress. And the benefit of that is it does evade greenwashing, because if corporations are required to back up their progress with data and with stories, it does boost credibility and it does boost trust. And, one thing Aila and I work on quite a lot together are sustainability reports. So we work with large corporations and telling the story of their sustainability progress each year. And one reason this is fascinating, especially in a kind of worlds around disclosures, is we've seen companies shift from these reports that are solely disclosure focused, solely financial, to storytelling and narrative, and understanding that telling sustainability stories is a point of connection with journalists and with wider audiences. And so I think there's a real push for companies to show up more authentically and to acknowledge where they may, not have met commitments, and to acknowledge where it's been challenging to make progress, but to highlight and be proud of the changes they have made.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jillian, I think that your area of expertise is sort of the white elephant in the room. And the backdrop of this is Beltway policy that filters down to the states. And you've lived and breathed this from your time in Michigan, obviously handling policy issues on the state level, then off to the Beltway in the federal administration. We've seen a lot of shifts and change, and yet at the same time, we haven't. That's what's so curious about this. We've seen nomenclature change, but not necessarily, businesses saying, no, we're going to put a knee down on this now. My sense from having been out there is not at all. The language has changed. The intent is not. Could you give us a backdrop of Climate Week New York in light of what's going on in the policy exchange?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gil. And it's funny because Brianne mentioned London Climate Week and said it was like the little sister, and all this excitement around London Climate Week. And with everything that has happened this year in the US with the administration changing, I was honestly quite nervous about who would show up at Climate Week New York and how people were going to show up. So it's really exciting right now to see so much energy happening around Climate Week New York, even among the shift in the policy landscape. And I will just say, in terms of the shifting landscape, you know, these regulations and the political climates that are rapidly evolving. It's in the US, but it's also globally. But what I want to point out, what resonates in one jurisdiction may backfire in another. And what we are seeing is companies that need really language that is adaptive with the policy cycle. Doesn't matter what administration, you know, they are part of. Having adaptive language is so key. You're seeing right now a lot of commitments being framed around energy security or responsible business or resilience, which resonates with markets a lot more than the word climate as it's become politically charged. And in terms of action, I just want to give one example. A company committed to, let's say, a specific carbon reduction target may pivot if legislation stalls, because we're in that moment. It can happen at any time. And a lot of times, instead of abandoning the goals, they invest in on-site renewable energy or adopt internal carbon pricing to drive reductions across business units. It's really about adapting the policies to make sure that the long-term vision of a lot of these businesses really are executed thoroughly, because it is a business imperative at the end of the day.
Thank you for that. It's very good to know. Obviously, I'm hearing a little bit of things have changed radically and business as usual.
Absolutely.
And that I think is important for people to reflect on. Brianne, I want to return to you again. You've been one of the people who entered into the climate environment or sustainable business conversation some time ago. And in addition to your working with major multinational corporations, you've been someone who's worked with major not-for-profit organizations. And I wanted to get the flavor of whether they're going to be looking at Climate Week New York with the same sense of hope and seriousness as they have in past years. Are they backpedaling? Are they sort of pressing forward? How does what Jillian just shared with us impact their decision making?
Right. And it's just so funny because when you mention, you know, prior COPs and so forth, the slogan was not business as usual. This is not, you know, we need to change how business operates. And I think we've gotten to that point now. What we're seeing, and even Millie mentioned it, of sustainability reporting and so forth, we've seen, you know, the pendulum kind of swing from the greenwashing being overly ambitious without the backup to greenhushing being silent and kind of prodding along quietly and not communicating about it as much. And so I think that there's this whole, you know, it's a refreshing kind of opportunity. This is not business as you, this is sustainability now is becoming infused into business operations and strategy. Kind of,
I think you're feeling optimistic.
yes, in that way, in that, as I said, where one, you know, major stakeholder is really stepping back, others are stepping forward, and that's where we're looking to private sector and nonprofits. Now, nonprofits, I mean, I think there have always been challenges, especially those that that rely on government funding and so forth. They've been hit hard and are looking for different opportunities and are shifting the way that they're communicating and even shifting their target audience of who they need to reach, because that funding source, they cannot rely on that anymore. But I am seeing, you know, actually even more emphasis on Climate Week and this environment rather than COP. Because COP is the government, you know, this is government parties. This is the conference of parties, and this is really where NGOs are hoping to connect with those policymakers and so forth. And that is becoming more and more difficult, and for many different reasons. And so more are putting their energy into these climate weeks. And, we said we have London Climate Week, we have New York, there was just Africa. Africa had a climate, different cities. San Francisco has a growing climate week. So this is also, happening on a much more local level. Different parts around the globe are trying to pick up, the baton where things are falling.
I just want to stay with you for 1 second. Government has stepped out of the active funding area a bit, not totally, but a bit, quite a bit. And Climate Week is where different communities come together to converse, to network, to make plans. Do you think that suddenly for many of these not-for-profits, corporations are now a respected, sought-after source for support? In other words, will we see newer approaches where companies that have wanted to get close to the credibility of not-for-profits have been sort of pushed off by those not-for-profits, and now those not-for-profits sort of are looking at company intent with more objective light?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Isla mentioned it too, how just the programming and structure of Climate Week has changed. It's no longer being spoken to and all of these like main stage moments. It's more about conversation and bringing people together for collaboration. So definitely, I think that is happening more and more. And kind of to Jillian's point, we have to make our communications and talk about how we're approaching sustainability also needs to change with the environment around us, right? And so, talking about climate action from this moral imperative or place of, is not working. We need to look at it about bringing value, creating opportunity and longevity and resilience. And so I think those kinds of conversations are also shifting the language that we use when we interact with, private sector and civil society is also changing. Obviously, yes, we want a better world for everyone, and that's always been at the forefront. But speaking at this from a strictly moral positioning is not necessarily what is breaking through and bringing people together to collaborate. It's about the value creation as well.
And I would just say one thing on that real quick. I would just talk about framing the business case and not the moral case. I totally agree with you, Brianne. It's about risk mitigation, competitive advantages, and long-term value creation. It's really, really focused on
I think that's what Millie was referring to. Let me swing over to Nicole for a second. I want to get her approach because, historically, of course, startups are incredibly hungry for visibility for many different reasons. They are not only perfecting the technology of their ideas, they need to raise funds to keep those ideas moving forward. Communication has consistently been linked to their credibility, as Millie pointed out, the sense of not greenwashing or greenhushing, but showing tangible results from innovation or policies or programs. A lot of the companies that you deal with who are innovators, really are reflective of what Millie counsels. What are you doing to change the situation? Your clients, for the most part, are doing exactly that. This balance of their needing to come into New York Climate Week and get that sort of like personal attention, has that shifted? Because not everybody's going to get the Wall Street Journal story, although many of your clients I know have. And on the front page, congratulations to you and everybody involved for those activities. But I wanted to ask the urgency or the imperative for these companies to use these moments where the community comes together to leverage their opportunity to stand out. What's the pressure on them? What's the pressure on you? And how are you both dealing with that?
It's a combination of what everyone's really been talking about, because when you have a startup, and to Millie's point, you want to bring data and proof and results, it's a chicken and egg situation because you want to get attention, but you need to have results. And in order to get results, you need attention. And so how are you going to manage that? And I think that's sort of where, communications becoming, part of your strategic business planning really becomes so relevant, because how you tell your story, to Jillian's point in shifting our language, language shifts all the time. In the 80s, we said things were rad, and in the 90s, we said things were cool, and then we said things were dope, and now we say things are fire. So, language changes, that's okay. But ultimately, there's a fact on the ground and a problem that has to be solved. So, this is an opportunity. Again, it's listening, it's looking around, it's looking for opportunities, maybe with partners that you wouldn't suspect. A startup has to partner with an NGO to open up funding possibilities through a big corporate, because the corporate can't fund, the startup, because they're a for-profit organization, so they fund it through the NGO. And all of a sudden you have this three-way partnership, and then you bring in a government, partner as well, and you've created this little ecosystem around a solution where you actually see change starting to happen. So I saw this great thing on LinkedIn. When communications does their job right, you don't know about it. And when they do their job wrong, everyone knows about it. So if we're doing our job right, it means that our clients are going to be getting, traction, visibility, and getting their thoughts out into the market in front of the people who need to hear it.
That's fantastic.
Just to interject there, Gil, I think Nicole, Brianne, and Jillian have all brought up this really important point, which is language should change, and it should be responsive, and it should be flexible, because we really need to be thinking about the audience, and not all of our audiences are going to be the same. It's not one size fits all. In a time that's harder to break through, both in terms of events, in terms of media, you really have to think about who am I targeting, and how am I strategically going to get there, and what messages are going to break through with these individuals. So, Nicole, to your point, with a startup who is struggling with, providing results, but they have an amazing innovation. It's like, how can we lead with a founder story? How can we, lean into some of that messaging? When we're talking about a big corporation that may have pulled back on some climate commitments, how can we show that they are sticking to their values, and simply how can we make this a moment of authenticity and leaning in, as opposed to, people feeling more and more removed from corporate action. So I think that idea of audience segmentation and being okay reaching siloed audiences with slightly different messages, while all staying rooted within values and an understanding of the business case for sustainability, I think is really key.
Thank you. Thank you for that. No, I want to circle back. You've been watching the Climate Week New York very closely. You're in tune with the types of themes and conversations that are going to take place, I imagine. And based on what Millie just shared, when she's talking about segmentation, I mean, obviously the themes are really what media and advocacy groups are going to be watching very closely. Can you share with us your perspective of what some of the hot points are going to be at next week's Climate Week? What type of conversation will be bubbling up that companies, NGOs need to be prepared to engage in?
I think a lot of conversations historically have had some sort of policy element to it, but now trade and geopolitics and the evolving regulatory landscape, not just within the United States, but also abroad, is something that is trickling into most of the conversations that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of how can we collaborate for growth internationally? How are we going to solve for the funding gaps? There's a lot of that. Typical topics that are still being covered would be the energy transition. There's a lot more in food and agriculture than there was in the past. It was always a topic, it was always there, but it was typically reserved more for some niche events. And now you're seeing a lot of very large scale events also tackling food, agriculture, resource scarcity. But what I'd say is the biggest change is communicating climate is becoming critical across Climate Week. We're seeing hundreds of events.
Loved your alliteration there, Aila. Critical across climate. This is beautiful. It is. It's essential.
Yeah, communicating climate it's everywhere now. How are we doing it? There are specific events targeting how can communications leaders successfully communicate climate action for their clients. So much alliteration right now.
I'm sure you're helping people develop those alliterations and make them clear. You own this one, you own that one. Now I want to stay with you just for a second longer and ask you on one hand, there's a lot of news that talks about like this month or this year was the hottest year in history in these states, and these states in the United States and Europe saw flooding that they had never seen before, disproportionate flooding, and we see all this conversation. I sense that we've shifted away, even though that's true, we've shifted away from the heat, the flooding, the cold, the fires, more toward different types of conversation that deal with economics, the economics of sustainability, the economics of sustainable business, responsible business, the economics of supply chain management. We've shifted more toward what does this mean for our economies of the world and less about what it means to the sustainability of the planet. What are your reflections on that? I mean, I understand that that's a window in time. It could change next year. It could change next week. But right now, we're really taking a look at this from the standpoint of the viability of economics as opposed to the viability of humanity. Do you find that more of your time is being spent on the economy and sustainability as opposed to human impact?
I'd say how sustainability projects lead to business growth, what Jillian was talking to about resilience, that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing across the board where companies are saying that understanding how an environmental disaster can impact your supply chain. We saw the trade disruptions that happened during COVID. That's not going to be the end of it. Different environmental disasters are going to continue to cause supply chain disruption. So how can companies preempt that? How are they creating a more resilient supply chain that ensures that they're able to continue operating and continue growing? That's a conversation that we're seeing quite a lot as well. And I think what's really important about this all is that what we're seeing being asked by journalists, being asked by conferences is don't just talk about what's working, talk about what's not working. Because we do want to put forth for other companies, hey, I tried this, it didn't work. Maybe don't try it yourself either. It's not going to get you far. We're learning more about what are the smart investments and how can we use data to really understand where these investments should be placed to ensure that the money's going in the right place to grow more money.
That's very insightful. No, Jillian, you've been on the side of sort of setting the tone of policy, but you've also, through your work in communications, been with companies as it's the chief communication officer, it's their policy people together, it's the product people together, and they're trying to find a nexus for where policy and their public policy response and sort of the business of business all come together. Climate Week, New York, it's a time where we can expect policies to all of a sudden be announced. We have to assume, or companies and their communication teams should assume that they have to communicate on one hand, and then some piece of news may drop that is very dramatic, that creates a shift. How do larger companies sort of think through how they're going to engage during Climate Week New York, and at the same time recognize that it's shifting sands?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gil. It's a hard question right now in this environment. But I think what we do really well is we counsel clients on balancing expectations with business goals. I will say the number one thing that I say is make sure you're aligning sustainability with business goals, because it not only mitigates risk, but it strengthens long-term resilience. And that's what we have to understand, despite the policy shifts, because like we all said, those are continuously going to happen. But if we make sure we're aligning sustainability with business goals, then you're in the right direction. You're going to strengthen long-term resilience and you're going to reach your business goals. But you also have to, especially in markets where climate change sparks backlash in some conversations. If you talk about innovation and competitiveness or efficacy, it really maintains momentum without undermining credibility. So language matters, talking about expectation with business goals, making sure it aligns with sustainability. Those are the key points that a lot of our clients are really moving forward with.
It's very, very wise counsel. Brianne, you have seen this category for quite a bit of time. You've seen it from the not-for-profit side. You've seen it from the major corporation side. You've worked in this globally. You've been to a number of COPs before. I am in the midst of this conversation with all of you, and while I appreciate from the news cycle and for what Millie shared, we're not talking about this category from idealistic terms any longer. We're talking about this from very practical operational strategy, or as Jillian just mentioned, goals. What are your goals? Whether you're a mega corporation, a not-for-profit, or a startup, what are your goals? Now we're looking, next week is Climate Week New York. Companies have a few more days to plan to get their act together. Could you sort of share generally what should be in the minds or on the punch lists of communication teams at the corporate level? What should they have in place? Whether they're speaking at a roundtable, whether they're hosting an event, whether they're a keynote speaker, whether they're just pressing the flesh.
Right.
What should companies I'll change that, at the very minimum, what should companies hope to get out of Climate Week New York from a communication standpoint?
That's another really great question. I think, this whole conversation has brought up so many different, themes here in terms of, authenticity and, aligning with your business goals and so forth. And I think one of the ways that we're approaching sustainability communications is really going back again to knowing your audience, who you're talking to, and being very clear again, what are we talking about that is material to your business, right? So one, that you're talking about the right issues, and then that this is aligned with your business goals, to Jillian's point, to what we've all been saying, and how are you creating value in this area so that you have impact. So you should be thinking about what is material to your business, what is the value creation, what is your, I would say, again, your company purpose, your own goals and values, like how does this all align? And then how, what are you trying to get, or what do you want that person that you're talking to know? So we have general, your basic talking points and so forth, but there's always that, like, based on this kind of conversation, this is what you want that person to walk away with.
This is
But I think-
wise words, wise words. My impression from last year and even coming into this year is that everybody who attends Climate Week, New York or London or wherever, is hungry to hear from other people. And I just want to give an example, and Brianne, get your thought on this. We're hosting in our New York City headquarters offices a reception. It's an RSVP reception, and we opened up the RSVP link yesterday. And in one day, 100 people signed up to attend our reception in one day, which scares me somewhat, but we can do it. This office comfortably holds quite a few people, hundreds. So I guess we'll be figuring out how the cheese platters should be spread around. But I think that pop on attending these gatherings, roundtables, receptions, dinners. I just wanted to get your general impression, because you're a veteran in this conversation.
Yeah.
A lot of times companies think like, I need to be on a keynote, I need to be in a panel. Should clients take the wheel and just say, it almost doesn't matter. I should actually reach out to the sort of people I want to connect with, and view Climate Week New York as the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference in San Francisco is to the life science industry. Is Climate Week New York the JP Morgan Healthcare Climate opportunity for companies to say, everybody's coming to town. I need to reach out early and plan my sort of dance card list and speak to the people I want to speak to. What's your counsel to them?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been doing client schedules for months, because things fill up very quickly. There are the daytime events, the breakfasts, and then you go into the conferences themselves, the side coffees to meet up with people face to face, having that opportunity. And then there's the evening receptions and dinners. So we have been planning this, and definitely those briefing books also include like who's going to be there, what are their interests, where do you align, what are the things that, again, so much of it is not necessarily sharing like, oh, I did this, but also challenges. Where can we learn from each other? Best practices, things like that. Where are there opportunities for collaboration? I think that's also really interesting and should be a key point for some of these in-person meetings.
That's wise
Can I just
words.
add to that, Brianne? Can I just, because I think like, we've talked about, and you alluded to, like, you go, you network, you meet, unexpected connections, and these things happen organically, which is amazing, but you can't leave it up to chance. And like you said, we've been planning client schedules for months. There has to be some orchestration here. What's your social media strategy going into Climate Week? What's your thought leadership strategy going into Climate Week? Even if you're not having a main stage moment, are you listening? Are you thinking about how you want to respond? Are you thinking of what your perspective is going to be that you're going to share following Climate Week? So there has to be that orchestration in advance with leaving space for the unexpected.
And also,
Nicole, I
Nicole,
wanted to ask
your
you.
point, sorry,
Please
Gil, if
go
you don't
ahead.
mind, just
Please.
as a real world example here, as Aila and I have been reaching out to organizers and in conversations, we've heard from at least a few of them, hey, beyond Climate Week, we are starting this new consortium, or we're starting this new partnership, or this new working group. Would your client be interested in participating? Would your client be interested in talking to us about it? And I think there begets the value. Yes, showing up to Climate Week and meeting people is going to be important and helpful. But even more than that, it's thinking, yes, Gil, to your point too, like everyone's on the ground. How do we make the most of that so that everyone who attends Climate Week is not just taking away, oh, this big company, spoke on all the amazing things they're doing. They're taking away actual relationships and actual next steps that they can use to further their business, further their impact, and really, move into Q4.
And
That's
looking
great.
at New York City as a whole, there's so much investor happening here. There's so many relationships that you can build here. And then we're all human. We have recency bias with conversations that we've recently heard sticking in our minds and bringing talking points out of all of us. Being able to merge what you're learning from Climate Week with what you're doing as a company to have these conversations with investors and key stakeholders that are based in New York that you may not have the opportunity to have that FaceTime with, it's critical to help your business continue to grow.
That's really fantastic. I want to ask sort of a last round, but I'm going to pop around. Last round of sort of like hot questions that tap into each of your expertise, and tough questions at times, because I think our audience needs some sort of hard-pressed counsel. So Nicole, I want to start with you. I've had the chance to travel with you and meet with a lot of companies that are at the cutting edge of climate innovation. And what I often find, not unlike the earlier stages of the health innovation sector, is that the founders are very, very hyper-focused on their engineering processes, and they're sort of saying, "Well, I'll communicate later." And what I've generally found is, unlike health, climate has many people thinking about the same thing at the same time. And I've come to the impression of, let's say you're dealing with biodegradable plastics, for instance. You're not the only company in the sector looking at biodegradable plastics. There are probably 100 or 200 or 1,000 innovators, engineers, chemists who are looking at biodegradable plastic. So I wanted to sort of get a sense of from you, and we're communicators, so obviously we believe in the discipline, but from your standpoint of looking at the differences of those that do and those that don't, your counsel, those that are considering on the startup or the earlier stage or the mid stage climate environmental technology companies, uh, why they should lean in. What's the value of being part of the conversation? I guess if you're thinking about or watching Climate Week New York or COP30 or whatever the case may be, you're interested in what others are thinking, saying, and doing. Should those companies that are earlier stage sit on the sidelines and continue to watch? Should they find a way to make themselves heard and part of the conversation?
Well, ultimately, it depends. It depends. It depends on the personalities. It depends on the stage that the company is at. It depends on their readiness. It depends on their communications infrastructure. Do they have a website yet? Is their LinkedIn set up? I just spoke with someone in my network, and she said we have this sponsorship opportunity, and we have something in a waste to energy, and it seems like a good opportunity. We need to get in front of investors. And I said, well, what are you going to do with it once you pay that money to get that placement? And she said, well, we don't really have anything set up. We don't have a CRM set up. We don't have a website set up. We don't have LinkedIn set up. So I said, so don't spend the money. So you have to be smart about it, enter the conversation when it makes sense. But once you do, you have to be consistent. There's a lot of channels by which to communicate. So you have to pick your places and be strategic about it. And that's why you have counselors who can help you make those decisions. But it's critical to be out there. And it's not necessarily critical to be out there in Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal. Your trade media are essential to connecting with the right people. These events like Climate Week, like COP, are really an important listening and learning time. And you don't have to listen to everything. You have to listen to the things particular to the spaces that you're in, and listen to who's speaking and where there might be opportunity for you down the road. And then you have to synthesize that and consider that in your planning.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to turn to Aila and Millie together. Sort of a question I would very much appreciate your counsel on. We've been talking about Climate Week New York. Brianne reflected on Climate Week London, her experiences at COP and so forth. And Jillian spoke about what's happening out of the Beltway kind of influences this nation and the world. But Aila and Millie, like everyone here, you're involved in this work every day. Doesn't make a difference of the week, it's happening. Sustainability, responsible business is, and I think Millie, you really pointed that out, which is it's become the business of operating business as a responsible business. Climate Week New York, the week of the 22nd to the 26th or 27th, comes and goes. From your standpoint, what's next after that? What do clients, companies, not-for-profits have to look at as the next? Any counsel that you can give us?
We're seeing a lot of our clients take, the immediate time after Climate Week as a real strategic rewrite time. So how can we take what we've learned from Climate Week, implement it into our existing strategy to improve it, and to make sure that what we're working on is contemporary? It does align with where the world is going. They learn a little bit more about different policies. We've talked a lot about national policies and international policies, but there's local policies as well, even within the United States. Things happen in California or in New York that are very different than they're happening at the federal level. So when you have these local state policies that within themselves are quite large economies, you need to be aware of what's going on, and Climate Week helps companies do that, especially now that we're seeing the policy side of things really enter more conversations. So really, you leave Climate Week, take note of everything you've learned, implement it, see how it could be part of your strategy, and then build and continue growing who you are authentically as a company, but in a way that is also moving with the way society is moving.
Millie, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm incredibly aligned with Aila. I think in the immediate, it's who did I meet with that I want to talk more with? Who did I meet with that could be a strategic advisor for me? Who could be a partner? what organizations did I encounter that I think are doing really amazing work, and I think our businesses are very aligned. You know, what spaces did I see that I would like to show up at next year, and why? It's these granular takeaways. Also in the immediate, you know, I think Nicole mentioned this too, but you need to post about it on LinkedIn and your social. You need to, you know, show through your website like that you were there. Does your website have a blog? You should have a blog on Climate Week. You should be writing about your takeaways. And I'm not just talking about, you know, kind of inauthentic, yeah, we showed up at Climate Week and these are the events we went to. I'm talking about, what did you actually think? What did you actually take away from it? Who did you meet? What impressed you? What made you sad? What made you optimistic? In a kind of solutions focused mindset, which is what I think I'm hoping we're moving towards, to Brianne's optimism earlier, you know, we also need to be thinking about how does what I do here translate into the real world? Because when you are in a Climate Week setting, it is fantastic. And there's so many ideas floating around, and it's so busy, and you're running around and you need your sneakers on, and it really is so important to take that minute to reflect and to think about what is the actual impact here? What is the ROI? Because if you're showing up just to show face in front of your contemporaries, you know, it's helpful, but it's not enough.
Wow. Wow. I'm going to do something I occasionally do. I'm going to do it now. First of all, exceptional counsel. I hope many people see this conversation before they head to New York. It's been invaluable. I'm going to ask each of you two sentences, very short, on a thought, which is for you as professionals, as communicators, as counselors, as people who are steeped in the issues of sustainability, climate, and environment, what you hope will come from your efforts at Climate Week New York. All of you are engaged, involved. You have different aspects: policy, communications, media, counsel to earlier stage companies, and so forth. But I know from working with each of you that this is much more than a job. This is a professional commitment that you have, and that you also recognize that all of this sustainability is not a side initiative. It is the strategy for a sustainable economy. So I just wanted to start and get your impressions of what will be success for you coming out of the week. Brianne, let me start with you.
This one is, I mean, I feel like to a degree, talk can be cheap. So I would like to see that real impact, and where people are kind of, it's more about setting these lofty targets and pledges, although this really does help to move impact. And I know we'll be talking about disclosures, but I really want to hear more about the impact and those practical solutions that people can take forward.
That's really important. I think that you're looking at social impact from this week, what will happen, what will shift from words into action, and from action into meaningful progress. Thank you for that. Nicole, what will be success for you coming out of Climate Week?
I think it's exciting to see innovations. It's exciting to hear new trends. I mean, I think this past week you had all the top tech leaders sitting in the White House talking about data centers. And I mean, that's going to be a huge issue. I mean, there's data centers and Gen AI, running, who knows what they're going to be running in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, but they can't run without water. So seeing,
we don't think of that, do we?
Right. Seeing what kinds of, we don't, and what's exciting is, it's easy to get down on some of the challenges that are ahead of us, but we don't know what innovations are ahead of us either. So kind of seeing what's coming up in the innovation space is really exciting, and kind of getting an understanding of where those things are going to fit in to the economy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Aila, what do you think? What will make you feel like this was a meaningful week despite all the hard work? And I know you and your teams are working sort of like pretty soon around the clock, what will make you feel like, wow, we made a difference in the world?
Genuine partnership connection. I would love to myself and for my clients that are attending Climate Week to have at least one new partnership that could come from the relationships that they're making at Climate Week. One new nonprofit that can support their work, one new academic institution that they could partner with to help drive innovation beyond the walls of the company. That's where I would see success.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Millie, I know that you're already counting your successes from the work you're doing with clients, but when the week is over, aside from being able to rest for a few moments, what will make you feel that it was all successful?
Well, it's funny. You can tell Isla and I work very close together because she kind of stole mine. But I agree with Isla. I think authentic connections, because that is something that cannot be replicated in our globalized world digitally, in my opinion. I think we can try our best and we should be using digital modes of community connection, but how amazing is it that we get to come together in person and to interact and to see each other as humans on a level playing field? I think that is the value. Gil, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but one of my LinkedIn taglines is talking to strangers. So for me, it's not just those strategic partnerships, although those are crucial. And I would love all of my clients to meet with someone that, we've designed a meet cute for them and it's fantastic and it begets a new partnership. But also I would love all of my clients and myself and all my colleagues to talk to someone else outside of their bubble and really engage in new perspectives and new ideas, because I think that is how we move forward. We cannot stay in our echo chambers. We need to extend outside of those.
Fantastic. Over to Jillian. Jillian, as communicators, as people immersed in public affairs, we're not bystanders to this conversation. We're in the thick of it. Our counsel, our sense of what the trends are, influence decisions and actions. For you, from your perspective, what will make you feel success coming out of Climate Week New York?
That's a hard question because, my work in sustainability and, my background in civil rights, and yeah, it's been a really tough year. And it's been a tough year for for some clients as well, in terms of loss of funding and partnerships and things like that. So what I would love to see, and Isla mentioned genuine partnerships, but those connections, I would love to see where government has failed, or funding has been lost. Who's stepping in? How are these connections being made? And how we can actually pair those two together. So that is my hope. I would love to see more of that, especially with a lot of the funding that has been lost this year.
You're on mute, Gil.
Don't know how that. This has been an incredibly valuable conversation. Thank you for that. I want to thank each of you. I think that people who listen to this video will be getting hours upon hours of amazing counsel and direction in just a sort of a short period of time. Brianne, Nicole, Isla, Millie, Jillian, thank you very much. And let's wish that Climate Week New York brings success to your clients, to you as professionals who are dedicated to the category, and obviously to all people who reside together, united on this planet. Thank you. Good luck.